Welcome everyone to Improving Edge. Today we have Rex Miller, and his topic is Bounce Back Stronger, Developing the 6 Disciplines to Post-Traumatic Growth. Rex has worked with more than 16,000 people to discover and activate their strengths using the Clifton Strengths and Core Clarity. Rex advises the International Well-Building Institute, and he works closely with the health technology firm Whoop and is an avid biohacker. You can read more about Rex's bio at theimprovingedge.com. Thank you again for joining us today, and take it away, Rex.
Thank you very much, Michael, and welcome Improving IT. I'm excited to go through this workshop, and this is something we've been working on, and I've been working on for years, now over a decade, in terms of developing these 6 disciplines. And I'll walk through that story and what the disciplines are, but the pandemic made something that was in the background for most organizations, a chronic need, into an acute need. And I really feel that these 6 disciplines are vital, not only individually, but for organizations to consider not just resiliency, but growth through difficult times as a strategic objective. So let me walk through a little bit here, and there we go. So during this presentation, I'm going to go over 4 key topics. Now, you've received a PDF of the presentation. I've since walked through it and found that, gee, if I did the original presentation the way it was set up, it would be like drinking from a fire hydrant, and you'd be more brain dead after the presentation than you probably already are, having gone through several days of video workshops. So you have the PDF of the entire content, but I'm going to focus on some key areas. And the first one is, what's different about today having gone through the pandemic? Now, what we've gone through is a mass disaster. That's what it's classified as. And I want to walk through why it makes this growth element, post-traumatic growth, more important. Then we're going to talk about what is post-traumatic growth. It's not a word we came up with. It was developed about a decade ago, looking at troops returning from battle. What are the 6 disciplines? The acronym is RACE P2, and we'll go through that. So just remember RACE P2. And then I'm going to focus on mindset, strengths, and energy. And I'm going to do a deep dive into the mindset and energy side. Even though there's 6, I will review briefly those others, but that's what I'd really like to focus on with this group. Now, you do have a Google Doc link that gives you an outline of the presentation, and you will probably need to request access. And so I'll give you access at the end of the presentation, and we'll talk about ways to stay in touch with the content. I post daily content around brain health, optimal performance, workplace culture, and you can find that on LinkedIn. So a little bit of background. I'm a futurist by degree, both undergrad and master's degree. It's called Strategic Foresight. And I've worked in the real estate and construction industry for over 40 years. I've been a leader in change in the industry, and I lead collective research around a proprietary model we developed on how to innovate or how to break through constraints. So 3 of the books in the commercial or the corporate area are The Commercial Real Estate Revolution, which has very similar principles to what you use in IT in terms of Agile. We use Lean. Agile is starting to come in from the architectural side of the equation, but it's really about how to build early collaborative trust-based teams to deliver projects. The same problems that you have in delivering software, we have in delivering buildings. The second book was around the environment and how does the environment either improve or constrain culture and performance. And the third book was around workplace health and well-being. So we've got deep research through these books over the last 15 years. We've compiled more than 400 subject matter experts and industry leaders in all of these research projects. So we've got a really deep treasure chest of resources and networks and research that we have at our access. I've also taken a similar path in the education world as well. So these two books are in the education world. The third workbook is a workbook that Dr. Jernigan and I developed on returning back to the workplace. And this is where some of those principles are included. I'll make sure you get a PDF, a free PDF of the workbook. You can, of course, go online to my website, to the product section, and purchase a hard copy if you want. All right, so let's get into my story with revitalizing the whole idea of post-traumatic growth. So March 12th of last year, we were down on Padre Island having spring break, and this news about a virus was starting to come out, and I wasn't really paying much attention. I was on vacation and I thought, shoot, it's a virus, no big deal. Then I went to get some supplies at the local HEB, and this is what I saw. And it really caught me by surprise. Now, it's on the coast. It was not hurricane season, but the shelves looked like it had been cleaned out like hurricane season. And the only humorous note I found is over on the left, you see nobody wanted any of the oat milk. So that remained. But that caught my attention. Now, again, I'm still not processing what's going on until I return home. And when I returned home, I began getting calls from clients. We need to postpone the event. We need to cancel the event. And I was starting to go through my typical 5 stages of grief. First, denying, this is not a big deal. We'll get through this. Fortunately, I pivoted quickly. Unfortunately, my clients forced me to pivot quickly because by mid-April, 100% of all my live engagements had been canceled. And I had not worked in this virtual environment that we are now. So I was able to make a quick pivot, a lot of it because of the disciplines that I had gained over the last 20 years, and reinvented the business model, got rejuvenated and revitalized. And so now we're going to talk about the how process. How did I shift quickly? And so I reached out to a colleague and a partner. His name is Dr. Jeff Jernigan. He runs a clinical practice that deals with burnout, post-traumatic stress. They work with the military, but more to the point, they work with nations that have experienced war and genocide. So their research really dives deeply down into the effects of trauma. And there are certain psychological stages that groups of people go through when they experience trauma. One of the things that we're finding more and more is the rise of trauma, the rise of depression, and the rise of burnout. Now, burnout has a very specific clinical definition. You may feel tired, you may feel fatigued, and there's just the physical side of tired and fatigue. Then there's what we call stress and stress fatigue. And then the third level is burnout. And the difference can best be described as that when you're in that fatigue, either stress fatigue or just genuine physical fatigue, it's like everything is pushing a boulder uphill. You still show up, but everything is just a grind. Now, when you hit burnout, you don't care anymore. You don't even get up or want to push the rock uphill anymore. And what Dr. Jernigan defines, and I love this definition, is that burnout is 1,000 invisible betrayals of purpose that go unnoticed until it's too late. And he says that part of the break in burnout is a breach in trust and a breach in relationships, whether that's with your organization or with others. You feel let down, you feel betrayed, you feel isolated. So those are key distinctions. Now, these are the stages of a mass disaster, and I won't go through all of them. The graph is pretty clear, but there's this pre-warning stage. So we've experienced that with tornadoes or major storms where you get a warning and you have this heightened alert. Then there's an impact. And a year ago, we had friends who got in North Dallas who were impacted by the tornado. And so that impact really is disruption. And you go through this adrenaline phase called the heroic stage where people rally and come together, and there's great community cohesion. And then there's a pause. Now, in some mass disasters, like we've experienced with the coronavirus, there is a series of setbacks. Now, you're in a fatigue stage. You've had this kind of opportunity to breathe, and now you go into, oh, it's bad again. And that happened to many companies last year when they started anticipating that summer or spring, the heat would kill off the virus, we'd be able to come back. I had several clients reset dates again and again to coming back and just put it off almost intentionally, with no date forward. And I saw the morale really drop. And then slogging through the summer, teachers, and we started seeing this really deep fatigue and burnout set in the fall and into the spring. Now, also, one of the things that leaders, I hope, address and embrace is that this kind of loss and disruption goes through a natural cycle of grief or loss, and you can't avoid it. I went through it, but I cycled very quickly because I knew what was going on. And many leaders really stayed in this denial phase for months. And several of my clients said it was a conspiracy and this, we're going to get back to work. I had one client get upset with me when I suggested we not put a specific date for a workshop until we see what was going on. So that's part of the process. Is we can get through this. We'll get through it. Why push back? Why question? Then there's the anger stage, and I experienced that as well. And the anger stage is just the frustration with the world not cooperating. Then you go through trade-offs and how to buffer. This is the bargaining, and you're going to experience that with people feeling, they've gotten used to the cycle of having been home for a while. Now companies are asking people to come back. That's a new disruption into their rhythm and their pattern. And so now they're bargaining and pushing back and asking, can I only come in 2 days a week or whatever? But recognize what's really going on underneath. These are people, and we're all dealing with how do we adapt and adjust to conditions that have disrupted our lives. Now, for some, it's depression. And then once we bottom out, we get into this acceptance phase. My hope is that leaders will recognize, take away the stigma, and open up the discussion on where are you? And it'll shift from day to day, depending on the setbacks you have or the things that happen to you. And you may be in the acceptance phase and go right back into anger because something that you thought was going to happen because of the conditions didn't happen. This is an important part of helping develop a healthy conversation and culture around talking about where we're at emotionally. And I'd like to shift the language away from mental health to brain health. I've been working with Dr. Amen. Our whole family's been brain scanned. That's a whole nother workshop. And what we're finding more and more is that the mental health issue cannot be separated from brain health. And we'll go into some of that in the 6 disciplines of post-traumatic growth, because the way you take care of your body, your mindset, that all contributes to your mental health. So my story, beginning with discovering the 6 disciplines, was first discovering that I did not have them, that I was not resilient. I was a new vice president moving from Virginia to Texas in 1999. I had a 10-year contract that would have set me for life. I would have been retired just about 10 years ago. And you can see that didn't happen. We moved my family, moved to South Lake, Texas, a nice mid-executive neighborhood, had a nice mortgage that fit that. And then in March of 2001, well, first we experienced 2 things. One is the dot-com crash. 70% of our business disappeared from November of 2000 till about March of 2001, and then 9/11 hit. Shortly after that, our company was just reeling from all of the loss of revenue and business. And then I came into the office one day and found my internet was turned off. It was really email. We didn't do much internet back then. And I went to Walt and said, our IT guy, hey, can you help me? And he said, you need to talk to the owner. I went in, and in 2 minutes, my life was turned upside down and I changed. My contract was ripped up. He said, we don't need a VP of sales. We need sales. You can either leave today or go back into sales. So I went from my nice salary bonus structure into $30,000 draw on Monday. And in the next 5 years, I struggled for my life. And during that time, I almost declared bankruptcy 5 times. I was not a good dad. I was so stressed, and I was not in physical health. And it was tough on everybody. And you know, the effects of that lingered for many years. But I discovered the Clifton Strengths in 2001. I began revitalizing my physical side. And this is what I looked like in the upper left in 2004. I was 195 pounds stressed, and I'm a certified tennis professional, and I hadn't picked up a racket for 15 years. Well, all of that began to change. I had no choice, but I had to figure a way out of this. So I worked my way out of it. Very successful. The book Commercial Real Estate Revolution came out in 2008, and it helped me build a new career. But in doing so, I ran across the work of Dr. Martin Seligman, who was working with the military on the rise of post-traumatic stress. Up to 18% of soldiers coming back from the different campaigns were experiencing post-traumatic stress. And when they did the research, what they found is that a small percentage were coming back stronger. And so that's the title of, how do you bounce back stronger? He identified 5 major traits. We've added a trait that I think is vital, and I'll share with you that trait. It's on energy. It's the physical side. And so let's take a look at what post-traumatic growth is. The criteria of people coming back really set the foundation of a whole new discipline of resiliency, even tracking into sports. So as we look at the 6 disciplines to post-traumatic growth, Michael is going to put up a poll, and the poll is simple. Which of these 6, resilient mindset, activating your strengths, your circle of 5, energy, purpose, meaning, progress, not perfection, which of those are your strongest? And just put the answer. I'll continue, but as you're answering, Michael will tally it, and then he'll interrupt, and we'll see what the results are. So let's start with the resilient mindset. My favorite definition is this is my definition, and it's the ability to positively move forward under any conditions. And how do you do that? Now, I've worked for a long time on mindset. It's part of high performance in sports. It's part of Boy Scout training and wilderness. It's built in. My mother was probably my best example of resilient mindset. This is my strongest attribute. But I am often asked, yeah, it's great. We know all the slogans about resilient mindset, but how do you develop it? One of the first things that these soldiers found is that they had a different set of expectations when things hit them. So my son, years ago, probably about 12 years ago, we were in Colorado. There's a mountain called Humboldt Mountain. It's a 14,000 foot high mountain. It's called a 14er in Colorado. He and some others that were at the camp we were with wanted to do a midnight hike so they could get to the peak by dawn. And I said, great. But I looked at him and said, I think you're a little underdressed, and are you taking any food? He said, nah, I won't need any. Well, I smiled, I gave him a Snickers bar and said, just take this in case. When he came back, it was first, wow, that was awesome. And then he unpacked the story of several times he almost turned back around because he was so cold and he was hungry and somebody gave him a food bar. But he loved the experience. It was a highlight. The difference, he was climbing and doing something for positive reasons. All the pain, all the circumstances were the same for everybody. But because his narrative, his expectations were to gain something from this, he interpreted the event through a positive lens. And Dr. Ahmed Sood with the Mayo Clinic also reinforces this. He studied victims at Bhopal after the DuPont disaster and found that there's a real difference between the pain and what we call suffering. Suffering is the psychological interpretation of the events you're going through. So expectations and having an expectation that life is going to be hard, but there's a positive outcome. You're either going to become stronger, you're going to learn a lesson, or there's a reason for this, really helps you forge that resilient mindset. If we look to the Stoics, to Epictetus, the bottom line of this is that there's two things you need to be clear in: what you can control and what you cannot, and then focus on what you can control. Let go of the things that you can't. Now, that's hard. We have to practice that, but that's a key to understanding and reducing the stress, but embracing situations as they come. So expectations, and then being able to sort out very quickly what you can control and what you cannot. A third one is play the hand you're dealt. Take it. If you're in the game, if you see yourself in the game, you don't have a choice. So you do the best with what you have. And that's a mindset. And so that's key. I learned that from my mom, watching her go develop Alzheimer's and her coping mechanisms. It was 5 years before the kids, my two sisters and I, started seeing and noticing because of her coping and the way she dealt with it. Now, here's some things to do. You don't develop this overnight. You've got to practice, and practice in little things. When you're in traffic and you want to be someplace faster than traffic is allowing you, practice your attitude. How do you use it? How do you tell yourself, this is good for me? This gives me this opportunity. This is life. All of those narratives that you're programming your brain really matter. And you're not going to be able to do it in hard times if you haven't done it in the little things. Number two, your motives. One thing that I've learned is when you do something for somebody else, an act of kindness, even a random act of kindness, it does program your brain. You're able to handle the uncomfortable things in life because you have a different motive. During the pandemic, I was home. Most of the time before the pandemic, I traveled. So when I was home, I thought, shoot, I will wash the dishes every night. Nice goal and objective. But I started to. My wife felt, gee, you work all day. This is my job. I wanted to do it to begin to develop the discipline of doing something positive for somebody else every night. And I learned how to make it fun. In fact, pots is my specialty. If you want me to come over and wash pots, I get a special pleasure on taking really nasty caked over pots and making them clean. But I did it knowing that I was looking for a way to practice the disciplines of growth, which is kindness and service to others. Now there are the distractions in life. These are the mindset killers. Distractions and procrastination. When you get stuck on something, what do? When you don't know, when you have something you had planned that doesn't happen. For example, one of the disciplines I set up is to get outside every day and hit some tennis balls against the high school wall. Well, some days it rains. Now I have a plan B in mind already. If it rains, I will jog. If it's raining too hard to jog, I will do some sit-ups and push-ups. It's automatic. What happens to many of us is that if we get sidetracked or get stuck, we don't have an automatic thing to go to. So we go in neutral, we go into idle, we get distracted, or we procrastinate. Phones and social media are killers. Phones, the average person checks their phone 150 times a day. We know that programmers that check email or their phones during the day, it takes them about 20 minutes to get back into a deep state of focus and concentration. These are killers. Default days that you hadn't thought about ahead of time, and you wake up and the day hits you and the calendar drives you and other people's demands drive you, and you're in reaction mode instead of intention mode. Comfort food. If you've had a stressful day, comfort food and alcohol is the kryptonite that leads to metabolic syndrome, chronic disease, lethargy, and affects your sleep. And then binge watching has a similar effect. You know, those blue waves from, if you're doing it at night or in the evening, if you're watching TV without blue blockers or you're playing video games, it's interrupting your sleep. What I'd like you to do in the chat is list which of these kryptonite things are the biggest killers for you. And while you're doing that, I'll return to Michael and find out. So what are the results of the poll, Michael?
Hey, Rex. By far the strongest discipline of the audience is 52% at resilient mindset.
Excellent.
We have 2 people who did activate strengths, none for circle of 5, 2 on energy at 7%, 17% purpose and meaning, and 21% process and progress. So that makes resilient mindset, then process and progress, then purpose, are the top 3.
Excellent. Thank you. And Michael, as you're watching people put in the chat their strongest kryptonite, I'll return back to you after 1 or 2 topics, and you can just kind of summarize what you're seeing in that. So the strength side of it, what you're seeing here are the Clifton strengths through the Core Clarity system. We've developed a new system called the Genius process that I'll tell you about at the end. But one of the ways to really build resilience is to play to your strengths on a daily basis. Now, in order to do that, you have to know what they are. And what makes the Clifton strengths unique is that they measure what you naturally do best and enjoy most. It's a psychometric tool measuring your strongest neural pathways. And if you think of your brain as a circuitry of water, where those top 5 are your rivers, your 6 through 10 are the tributaries into the rivers. And then you've got streams, creeks, and dry beds. And the research is clear. You learn faster, you develop better playing to your top 5. Now, in our coaching, we do use the top 10 and we look at the bottom 5. But for the most part, what you're seeing here is an archetype around my top 5 strengths. The reason is that different people, depending on your strengths, you will find engagement differently. You will find recovery differently. So you can't do a one size fits all and say, take a break, go to the woods and chill for a week. If you've got achiever and activator, responsibility, you're not going to be able to sit still in the woods. So we need to really know how people are wired to coach them in to optimize how they best do things. The other thing the strengths tell us is it doesn't tell us what somebody will be good at. It tells us how they will be successful if they choose to do something. In the background, what you're seeing with the pyramids and the circles, that's the Core Clarity system, taking 5 strengths that fall into 4 quadrants, relating quadrants, which are blue, motivational quadrants, which are magenta. Those are at the top, activated with people. Thinking quadrants, the thinking quadrant, which is green, and the action or acting quadrant, which is orange. Those are the bottom or internal. And you can see my 5 strengths create a pattern. 3 green, 3 in the acting, one in the orange, those are internal, one in the relating or the blue, that's external. So most of my energy is internal. Doesn't mean I'm an introvert, but it does mean the energy comes from thinking and doing, and I do it with others. So it's a great description of my business and my research. I do lots of research, but I do it with others in cohorts. Now, the more strengths you can tap during the day, the more energy you get. So the other thing we need to realize with the strengths is that you're activating hormones in your brain. So when you're activating a strength, a strong synaptic cluster, you're releasing dopamine. When you get into that flow state, and there's a whole process of designing work to be in flow, and that's a combination of complexity, novelty, upping the stakes at about a 4% higher level outside your comfort zone that really gets you into your flow state. Those are endorphins. So when you're absorbed in something, your brain is releasing endorphins. That's the second win or the runner's high. When you're with others and feel like it's psychologically safe, people are connected, there's familiarity, that releases serotonin. That's that connection. And then if it's even deeper and there's vulnerability, openness, transparency, that's oxytocin. Now, I'm beginning to work with designers to look at how do we design space to release hormones, but that's what's going on. So knowing how to activate your strengths helps you rejuvenate and recover. The other item, when you activate your strengths, you create this virtuous loop. The work you do is naturally better. You learn faster. It comes easier. It's more satisfying because of those internal hormones. They call that intrinsic motivation. And because it's better, other people recognize it. So you get the extrinsic motivation of the reinforcement. Conversely, if the work you're doing is not activating your strengths, either because it's, your boss is prescribing how you do it and isn't aware of how you would best do it, or you're not aware of how to apply your strengths, then what happens is the work is more difficult. It's not as good. You don't feel the satisfaction and you don't get the recognition. And we call that stress. And it's releasing cortisol. So the circle of five, I won't spend much time on it, but because it was kind of down on the list, research shows that there should be 5 key vital relationships in your life, one of them in the workplace, for a healthy, resilient life. And when we talk about those close connected relationships, these are not just people who tell you nice things and pat you on the back and encourage you, but they also hold you to your best. But one of the criteria I like to use is who would come to help you out if you were broken down on the highway, flat tire at 2 a.m, who could you call? Now, they may come and chew you out. They may tell you that I told you to get that tire fixed, but they would still come. Research shows that most people have less than 2 key relationships in their life. In fact, you can search for isolation or loneliness epidemic and find that research readily. Okay, let's dive into energy. So, Michael, we're going to start a new poll here, but what are you finding in terms of what people are saying is their top kryptonite?
I would say it's split between binge watching and distractions and procrastination.
Okay. All right. Well, those are 2 immediate areas you can find some improvement in. So let's talk about energy. And for me, energy is the combination. It does include mindset, but it includes sleep. And so Michael's going to release a poll on sleep to find out how many hours you're in bed a night on average. It includes food, it includes movement and exercise, but I'm going to focus primarily on the sleep part of it. Hold on. You're asking me to fill out the poll too. So I'm going to go over and fill it out. There we go. All right. I may be an outlier on this. So let's take a look here at what's going on. So first of all, let's look at why energy isn't so important. Energy stress is zapping the vitality that we bring to work every day. It is really the master villain. I wrote a book on it called The Healthy Workplace Nudge, and I wrote a companion book for educators that actually goes more into the stress trauma side of what people are experiencing. And prior to the pandemic, Dr. Jeffrey Pfeffer at Stanford said that work is the fifth leading cause of death. And Japanese have a word, death by overwork. 75% of employers rank stress as their top health productivity issue. Harvard Medical says that 76% of employees say that high stress, that work is the number one cause of high stress. So it's a big issue. It interrupts your sleep. So this is the master villain that we have to get a handle on. But one of the best ways to get a handle on it is to feel good. So there's a couple ways that we can feel good. But the first thing we have to acknowledge is that our work has shifted dramatically, and it is creating higher cognitive load. Whenever you hear the word cognitive load or emotional load, just substitute the word stress. It's strain on your system. It's all the autonomic nervous system. And in working with Whoop, when I started seeing numbers that alarmed me and surprised me, they said that emotional load and cognitive load measure on your autonomic nervous system the same way physical load in terms of sports performance. So this is the new reality. And it's more stressful. It's more physically stressful because your eyes, those muscles that use close focus, get strained within 45 minutes to an hour, and they need to be relieved. There's other constraints as well. Your brain is working harder to fill in because you're not picking up on nonverbal cues. 70 to 90% of communication is nonverbal cues. So you're having to read in. You also feel that you're on camera. And so you're not, you're looking on camera and it's really distracting if somebody's not. So you feel that pressure. So all of those things add to one thing. Your brain, which consumes on average 20% of your calories, it's the highest energy consuming organ, is doubling that consumption when it's in this virtual environment. It's consuming up to 50% of your calories. So if you're feeling fatigued by mid-afternoon and you've done back-to-back-to-back Zoom sessions, this is why. So here's what I discovered. I started measuring the strain of workshops and webinars using my Whoop strap here and my Oura ring. Now, what I like about the Oura ring is it helps me translate into common understanding on the strain. And it looks at calories and it converts the strain or the calorie burn to the equivalent of walking. This is a 4-hour workshop I gave. And you can see that I burned 2,500 calories in that 4 hours. It was the equivalent of a 29.7-mile walk. And after doing a few of these, that's when I called Whoop and said, what's going on? Now, I'm an athlete and I play high-level tennis. I would not burn 2,500. I may burn 2,000 calories in 4 hours of tennis, but not that much. So remember, when I'm doing physical load, that's not as taxing as mental load. So I'm consuming more brain calories. And I get the question a lot of times is, so why am I not losing weight? Well, 2 reasons. One, they're stress calories. And number 2, you're probably participating in unhealthy coping behaviors at the end of the day to deal with that cortisol load in your body. So when we do training, we talk about how to get through the day and release that cortisol periodically through the day, because it is cumulative unless you release it. And athletes have learned how to do that. There's simple techniques to do. After every session, I go through a little bit of a routine that helps me level set, rejuvenate my eyes, get the cortisol out of my system, and get the blood flowing so I'm ready for the next. But the unhealthy coping behaviors are smoking, overuse of alcohol and drugs, comfort food, sugar, starches, carbohydrates and sugar. The more you can eliminate that from your diet, the healthier you will be. Any processed foods, and then the binge watching. These are considered the primary drivers of what's called chronic disease. And chronic disease consumes 90% of all the expenditure in the United States and healthcare costs goes to chronic disease. It's a big issue. So one of the things we also found because of COVID is that high level of chronic disease called underlying health conditions, UHC, and obesity was a major reason people died of the coronavirus. 92% of the deaths can be traced to these two items. So this then becomes resiliency. If you keep backing it in to a healthy and vital workforce, is a key strategic objective. And in the book, The Healthy Workplace Nudge, I go through why the continued compounded rate of this is going to bankrupt many companies in terms of health costs. So we now know that stress is killing more than productivity. It is killing us. So here's another indicator that work is behind, or the way we used to do work is behind all of this, and why changing work culture and building resiliency are key strategies. In 2019, there were 805,000 heart attacks in the United States. It dropped 40% during the coronavirus, and I'll let you guess the one reason why. So let's pause for a second and find out about the sleep. What did we find with sleep, Michael?
Yeah, 40% of the audience gets 7 hours of sleep, and 20% 6 hours, 15% get 8, 15% get 9, and only one person voted for 4 hours of sleep and 2 for 5.
Okay. All right. So your body, so time in bed is not the same as sleep. And you'll see that in some future slides that I show. One of the new areas and breakthroughs in sports is understanding the role of recovery in performance. And sports was experiencing about, close to a decade ago, something called overtraining syndrome. And we know the slogan, there ain't no gain if there ain't no pain. But what was happening is that some of the athletes like Tom Brady and Roger Federer, Justin Verlander and LeBron James were discovering the value of sleep. LeBron James gets 10 to 12 hours of sleep a night, same as Roger Federer. And these are athletes that are still performing at an extremely high level late in their careers. So the key mechanism of this is something called heart rate variability. Now, I'm not going to get really technical with heart rate variability, but just think of in between your heartbeats, your heart is still fluttering. And it's fluttering because your autonomic nervous system is trying to gauge what's going on in the environment around it. And it's that ready mode. It's kind of like the idle to a car. And it's the difference between having a Porsche where you just touch the accelerator and your heart gets into gear very quickly, or it's more like my 2005 Honda CRV. When I hit the gas pedal, it kind of dies a little bit before it accelerates. That's what heart rate variability is. It's that ability for your heart to jump into action and then get back into rest mode. And there's a measure for it. And the higher the heart rate variability, the more resilient you are. And here's where it works. It works in something called the autonomic nervous system. And the autonomic nervous system handles all of the automatic functions, heart rate, breathing, all of those areas. And there's two sides. The red side is the sympathetic nervous system. The sympathetic nervous system is the accelerator or the on button. Now, it's necessary. It's what gets you up in the morning. It's that cortisol, and it helps you perform. But it's also that fight-flight tendency. And so the problem is that we're in this kind of acceleration mode most of the day, most of the time, and we don't give our bodies the green side, the nice smooth rhythms in the parasympathetic nervous system of rest. And rest comes from sleep, fellowship eating, social eating, where that connection, where the positive hormones are taking place. Dogs, because they lower your heart rate down, and sex. Those are all the things that are part of that recovery zone. So when we look at how do we move into this mode, one of the things that has helped me is getting some data on the true nature of my sleep. And this doesn't come from Fitbits, and it doesn't come from tracking your REM or your deep sleep. It comes from tracking your resting heart rate and your heart rate variability. And there's several devices. The Oura Ring does it, the BioStrap, Garmin. If you've got a favorite strap that does that, put it in the chat. My favorite is the Whoop. That's my standard of truth. And I'll just walk you through a little bit of what a device like this will do. First, it needs to baseline how much sleep you actually need. So my baseline, as you can see in the bottom left, is 7 hours and 23 minutes. Now, that doesn't represent the time I need to be in bed, because I need to add to those minutes the strain for the day, the sleep debt from the prior day, and then any naps that I might take. And I've become a frequent 20-minute napper. Now, the other thing it needs to take into effect is my efficiency, because all the time I'm in bed doesn't necessarily mean I'm getting sleep or true recovery. Mine is 80%, which means that for 7 hours and 23 minutes, I need to be in bed nine hours to get that amount of recovery time. So those of you who put 7 hours in, 6 or 5, what you want to consider is that anything under 6 hours of real sleep, full sleep, your brain is legally drunk in terms of its ability to function and think. And you're developing the kind of amyloid plaque in your brain, the things that lead to more long-term challenges that you really need to consider. Now, when you first start out, like I did, it was a rude awakening. The blue line is the strain for me, and the green, red, and yellow are my recovery levels. And the first is that I was experiencing overtraining syndrome. I was stripping my gears, which is similar to getting into a state of adrenal fatigue. I was demanding more of my body than my body had to give. And over an extended period of time, that just wears you down. Now, after a period of time in January of 2020, just with the feedback alone, without any kind of intentional shift or change, just slowly adjusting and learning and adjusting and learning, you can see where it's much more synchronized in the flow. And that's what feedback does to you, and having accurate feedback. Another thing you'll discover too, and what sports teams have discovered, is that when you travel and perform, it takes stuff out of you. On average, your recovery levels drop 40% when you travel. That's why many sports teams travel a day before, just to make sure they have that adjustment time. And then not all sleep is the same. Now, if you look at the second screenshot was 7:05 and the fourth screenshot was 7:27, you'll see I was in bed, if you look down to the middle, for 9 hours, but I got 16% recovery. My heart rate variability was high. My resting heart rate was high. My heart rate variability was low. And it wasn't quality sleep. But with less time, you can see my resting heart rate was down to 40 and my heart rate variability was 107. So just because your sleep device is saying, gee, you were in bed for 8 hours and you got this much REM and this much deep sleep, it's not measuring how much it restored you or how depleted you might be. The other area I discovered too is that the craft beer that I enjoy affects my sleep. My REM cycle is 41% shorter when I drink alcohol. So these are things you learn and get feedback, and then you can decide how you want to adjust that. These are two books I recommend that you read. So briefly, those were the two key points I wanted to focus on. But the third, one of the final ones is on purpose. And when we look at Maslow, when we understand what we're here to do, as Mark Twain said, there are two important dates in your life: the day you were born, and then the day you discover why you were born. There's an internal drive that what you can become, you must become. That's the hierarchy of needs. And then this genius process that we've developed, we've linked the Clifton Strengths to discovering that internal purpose that you have. And essentially it is this: the Clifton Strengths tells you what you are at your best, what your potential is. So if you start with just that piece alone as the beginning to uncover your purpose, which is becoming the best version of yourself, that lays a good start and a good foundation to moving forward. Here's why we're focusing more and more on the Clifton Strengths and our genius process. In 1968, NASA created an assessment for future astronauts. They wanted the best and brightest. George Land, who is also the creator of the S-curve, developed this creativity test. And it was so elegant and simple that toddlers and young children could take it. So they did. They tested it with 1,600 kids. And here's what they found. That 1,600, 98% tested as geniuses. By age 10, it was 30%. By age 15, it was 12%. And in adults, after doing 280,000 adults, it dropped to 2%. And there's several reasons that we go into as to why and how we lost it, but how do we gain it back? That's the new process that we've developed called the genius process. And we're happy to share that with you. But combining, rediscovering how to recapture some of that lost genius we had, along with this concept called marginal gains or progress. And if you look at the UK story, this is Sir John Brailsford, who came in the late 1990s to head the UK cycling team. They had never won a Tour de France in 100 years, 76 years without any major medals. He promised that within 5 years, they would win a major world championship. He was laughed at because of the status of the team, but he delivered in 3 years. So a lot of this has to do with what you already know about agile and continuous improvement, but it's focusing on the process, not the outcomes. So marginal gains is all about getting the discipline and finding small incremental ways every day, getting 1% better in my relationships every day, getting 1% better in my health, getting 1% better in my focus, in my disciplines every day, just developing that internal process. So this gets us to the daily fundamentals. One of the challenges when I'm coaching people is they have really grand ambitions. And like all of the New Year's resolutions, most people give them up within a month or two. So we work on talking about how do we replace the willpower and the nice intentions with just tiny habits. One of the things I wanted to do is that in between every call, do some sit-ups, push-ups, get all of that worked up. And I knew that if I started with grand goals, that it wouldn't last. So I started with one sit-up in between calls, one push-up in between calls, one deep knee bend. Once that became in place after a couple of weeks, I increased it. Now it's just automatic. And I do 15 sit-ups in between each call, 15 push-ups, 10 deep knee bends with my eyes closed, doing Bottega breathing in between every single call. Now, that concept can be used for any habit you want. You start small, but it's key consistency instead of grand attempts. And then when I do it, I say, great, that's just like me. I reinforce it. I've developed these habits in different areas of my life, whether it's eating, exercise, and showing up and doing things consistently creates compound results over time. It's one of the reasons why I was able to bounce back in March of last year the way I did. It took me 7 years in 2001 to get myself all the way back, to get physically and emotionally, relationally, and career-wise back in shape. Last year, it took me less than 3 months to completely pivot and reinvent my business, have great time with the family, take full advantage of it. So that's what post-traumatic growth looks like. So one more poll. Which of these 6 do you want to focus on next? Which of the 6 do you really want to focus on? And while you're compiling that, I'll finish up, and we've got a few moments for any questions in the chat. So here's the rest of my story. I'm currently 66 years old. You saw the picture of me back in 2004. I'm in the best shape of my life. I was 195 pounds then. This morning, I weighed in at 152. I play tennis several times a week. My business is doing well. My relationships are great. Now, that doesn't mean all of life is good, but my mind is ready for the next. I recommend everybody go online and take what's called the Real Age Assessment. It's a website called ShareCare, developed by Dr. Roizen at the Cleveland Clinic and Dr. Oz Memick. It will measure your chronological age versus your biological age. And as you can see here, my biological age is 9 years and 5 months younger than my chronological age. So I believe these 6 disciplines can lead to your living younger. That's the whole point. How do we perform higher, live younger, enjoy what we're doing more? So if you want to reach out to me, you can find me on LinkedIn, or you can send me an email at rex@rexmiller.com, or you can go to my website, rexmiller.com, and look at the product section. So Michael, as we're finishing up, what did we find in the poll?
It looks like the majority of people, 30%, would like to focus on purpose and meaning.
Sounds like we need to have a little time on going through the whole genius system and strengths to start with that.
And we have energy and sleep, eat and moving after that, and activating strengths.
All right. Pretty evenly balanced.
Well, it's a little interesting because over 50% voted resilient mindset at the beginning.
Yeah. And you've got 20% or 18% want to build that even more. That's great. Well, thank you for the time. Michael, were there any questions that came up that you feel that people are dying to have answers to?
Yeah, let's see. Our first question is asking if you're familiar with Tom Rath's Strengthsfinder Assessment. And
it's the same. Yeah.
Oh, it's the same.
Yeah, it's the same. Yeah, it was changed to Clifton Strengths. It was Strengthsfinder, and then Donald Clifton passed away, and they rebranded it as Clifton Strengths, but it's the same assessment.
All right. And he was going to ask if you'd compare to the two, but it sounds like they're the same.
They're the same, yeah.
And another question is, why are Whoop and Oura Ring specifically your go-to body tracking instruments? And wondering if they measure different things, and kind of the...
Yeah, they look at different things. They have different dashboards. Whoop is more accurate for me. Some people like the Oura Ring because it's a ring and it's not as, it's less noticeable. The Oura Ring for me doesn't track physical activity as accurately. And part of that is that it moves, there's some wiggle room on there. I've used Whoop since 2016. I've seen others come out. I've tried others like the BioStrap, but I still keep going back to Whoop because it has, for me, the most accurate, consistent data and the most robust analytics for me.
And another question here is, what are some sample of, your exercises and routine to wind down, reset your eyes at the end of the day?
So what I've done is I've shifted my 60-minute meetings to 45 minutes. And so Kathy, who schedules me, will do that. During those 15 minutes, I will go through my routine of 15 sit-ups, 15 push-ups, 10 deep knee bends, eyes closed. And the reason the eyes are closed is because it helps build your core. There's something called visual ocular control. So when your eyes are open, your body is compensating to maintain balance. But if your eyes are closed, you have to be truly balanced to do that. And that's an indicator of stress and overall resiliency is how strong your core is. Then I will readjust my adjustable work surface. So I'm sitting now. In the next meeting, it'll be standing. I will walk outside my office, go downstairs, get some water. So I'm forcing myself to move. I will walk outside and just walk up and down the block for as much time as I can to get my eyes and get the blood flowing. That's based on NASA research on how astronauts can maintain vitality in a weightless environment. It's called non-exercise activity thermogenesis. So when I do that 6 or more times a day, that is healthier than my waiting till the end of the day and going out and hitting an hour of tennis balls. That's actually healthier.
Yeah, I find when I'm stressed at the office, I'll walk outside to the front garden, kind of pace around the garden area, and it just keeps my mind off of what I had to just do and on to the next.
Yeah, absolutely.
I don't have any other questions at this time, and we've hit 11 a.m., so it's a good time to wrap up. I'd like to just thank everyone first for joining the Improving Edge with Rex Miller, and remember, we have a couple more sessions coming up today. Do you have any closing thoughts, Rex?
Well, I would start with your strongest area and really lock it down, and then pick the next one you want to work on and start small incremental ways to build it up, and then just keep adding another discipline and another discipline and take it that way.